In 1996, 6 cousins vanished from a busy train station in broad daylight. No witnesses, no suspects, no goodbyes. Just gone. For decades, their family searched for answers, haunted by silence. But as investigators unearthed long-buried secrets, it became clear. The disappearance of the 6 cousins wasn't just a crime of opportunity. It was a reckoning. A punishment carved into bloodlines. If you're new here, subscribe for more stories where the past doesn't stay buried. The summer heat of 1996 clung to Harrow Creek Station like a damp sheet. Travelers fanned themselves with newspapers, and the air smelled faintly of engine oil, hot concrete, and sugared soda. 6 cousins stood together near Platform 4, each carrying a small overnight bag. They had come from different towns, different lives, gathering that day at the request of their grandmother, the matriarch of the sprawling Barrett family. They were supposed to visit her country estate, Rosebridge Manor, for the weekend. The oldest, Clara, 19, fussed with her younger sister's hair. Daniel, 17, leaned against a pillar, chewing gum like he couldn't care less. The twins, Sophie and Sam, both 14, shared a pair of earphones, bobbing slightly to unheard music. Emily, 13, scribbled in her sketchbook while Luke, 12, played with a red yo-yo, its string flashing in the sunlight. It was almost time for their train. Witnesses later remembered the group, too many to forget. 6 kids, loud with the kind of laughter that belongs to people who don't yet believe bad things can happen to them. A station vendor recalled them buying lemon sodas. A guard remembered the boy with a yo-yo nearly hitting him in the shin. But no one remembered what happened after the announcement. At 3:17 p.m., the intercom crackled. Passengers for Rosebridge Junction, please proceed to Platform 6. Platform 6 didn't exist, and yet, according to the grainy black-and-white CCTV, the cousins walked toward the far end of the station, their bags slung casually over their shoulders. They slipped into a shadowed corridor beyond the ticket machines, and then nothing. When their train departed at 3:22, the platform was empty. Their grandmother waited at Rosebridge Manor that evening, pacing the garden, setting the table for dinner, insisting to anyone who would listen that they were just delayed. But by midnight, their absence pressed like a storm against the family. By dawn, the police were called, and the Barrett family's silence began. The present day began not with a discovery, but with a demolition order. In early spring, 27 years after the cousins had vanished, Harrow Creek Station was marked for redevelopment. The mayor wanted a glass and steel hub. The old tiled corridors, the iron beams, the soot-streaked platforms, all of it was to be gutted. That morning, Detective Sarah Hale stood beneath the station clock, listening to the clang of workmen preparing scaffolding. She had been a rookie officer in 1996, barely out of academy training, when the cousins disappeared. The case had never left her. Now, grayer at the temples and haunted by years of unsolved files, Sarah had returned. Her eyes traveled to the far end of the concourse, the disused corridor where the cousins had last been seen. It had been bricked over years ago, officially unsafe for foot traffic. But Sarah knew the truth. The barrier was built after the disappearances, not before. Detective? The voice belonged to Eli Barrett, now in his 50s, uncle to the vanished 6. He approached with a stiffness in his gait, the kind that came from years of carrying grief like luggage. His family had funded the petition to halt demolition. They wanted one last sweep of the station before everything was torn apart. "Thank you for coming," Eli said. His voice was clipped, but his eyes lingered on the bricked-up wall, the way someone might look at a grave. Sarah nodded. "One last chance to find what we missed." Behind them, the mayor grumbled at the delay. Cameras had been invited, local news, hungry for nostalgia and scandal. For weeks, the Barrett family had been in headlines again. 6 cousins, no trace. After 27 years, the demolition team pried at the brickwork. Dust billowed. The sound of chisels echoed down the concourse. Sarah braced herself, though she couldn't say for what. When the final slab cracked loose, the air that rushed out was stale, thick with mildew. A passage yawned open, its tiled walls dripping with moisture. "Sealed since '96, muttered one of the workers. Sarah stepped forward, flashlight in hand. Her beam caught rusted pipes, torn posters curling from damp walls, the faded outline of graffiti. And then, something else. Half buried beneath rubble near the corridor's end lay a heap of fabric. She knelt, heart pounding. It was a backpack, once blue, now mottled with mold. The zipper teeth glinted faintly. She brushed away grime. On the front pocket was a patch, a rainbow stitched crudely in fading thread. Her throat closed. She remembered that rainbow. It had been stitched by Margaret Barrett, mother of Sophie and Sam, after one of the twins ripped their bag on a fence. Sarah had noted it in her file all those years ago. "Bag recovered," Sarah said hoarsely into her recorder. "Condition, severe decay, but identifiable." Eli staggered closer, his face ashen. "That's Sophie's. She never went anywhere without it." The cameras clicked. Reporters whispered. Somewhere, a train horn blared, mocking. Sarah kept her eyes on the bag, her thoughts spiraling. After 27 years, something had been left behind. But why here? Why behind a wall no one should have reached? And what else waited in the dark? She straightened, shining her light farther down. The corridor bent to the left, where the shadows thickened into something impenetrable. "Seal this area," Sarah ordered. "No one goes in until the forensics team arrives." As she spoke, her mind flickered back to the Barrett family. After the disappearance, rumors had spread like mold. Inheritance disputes, whispers of an old feud. The family had always been wealthy. Rosebridge Manor, the estate, had been built on rail contracts during the war. But money brought enemies. Or was the enemy already inside the family? Sarah turned back to Eli. His face was pale, his eyes glassy. "We'll find out what happened here," she said. But the truth, Sarah knew, was that some discoveries don't bring peace. They bring more ghosts. The discovery of Sophie's backpack cracked the Barrett family open like a coffin that had been nailed shut for decades. By evening, the news had spread beyond Harrow Creek. National headlines carried the image of the mold-darkened fabric, the stitched rainbow patch, a symbol of both innocence and ruin. Commentators spoke in somber tones about the vanished six, resurrecting a story most of the country had half forgotten. At Rosebridge Manor, the Barrett family gathered around the television. The estate's great drawing room had once hosted glittering holiday parties, its chandeliers reflecting gold onto polished wood floors. Now, its grandeur seemed hollow, dimmed by time and silence. Dust hung in the air, stirred only by the low hum of the television. At the center of the room sat Agatha Barrett, 91 years old, the matriarch whose iron will had long dictated the family's fortunes. Age had carved her face into brittle lines, but her eyes, a sharp pale blue, remained unyielding. She watched the broadcast without a word, her hands resting on a carved cane. Around her, the surviving family members shifted uneasily. Eli, her eldest son, who had been at the station that morning. Margaret, mother of the twins, her hair gone silver too early, her face ravaged by sleepless years. Richard, Agatha's second son, impeccably dressed, sipping whiskey too fast to be casual. Helen, the quiet youngest daughter, who rarely spoke except to tend to Agatha. No one mentioned the empty chairs. Margaret's voice cracked first. "That was Sophie's. I stitched that patch myself. We don't need the television to tell us what we already know," Agatha said sharply. Her voice, though thin, cut through the room like glass. "My grandchildren are dead. They have been dead since the day they walked into that station." Margaret flinched as though struck. Don't you dare say that, Mother. We don't know what happened. We never knew." Richard exhaled smoke from the cigar he had lit without asking. "The police will drag this through the mud again. They'll find scraps, debris, anything that stirs the public's hunger for spectacle, but nothing that explains." Eli stood, restless, pacing before the hearth. You don't brick off a corridor for no reason. Someone knew something back then. Someone wanted it hidden. He turned to his mother. "Don't you?" Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Careful." The silence that followed was jagged. Everyone in that room remembered the whispers after the cousins vanished. That the Barrett name carried more than wealth. It carried secrets. Rosebridge Manor had always been a house of hushed conversations behind closed doors, of ledger books locked away, of land titles no one dared trace too far back. Helen spoke finally, her voice hesitant. "The demolition will continue, won't it? They'll tear the rest down." "Not until the forensics team is done," Eli muttered. "Sarah Hale won't let them." At the mention of the detective, Margaret's face softened briefly. Sarah cared. She always cared. She was the only one who didn't treat it as just another cold case. Agatha lifted her cane and struck it against the floor with surprising force. "Enough. What happened is in the past. No good comes of digging up corpses. The Barrett legacy will not be dragged through the dirt again." But even as she spoke, the television replayed the image of the bag over and over. And for the first time in years, Margaret allowed herself to hope, and to fear, that answers were finally coming. Sarah Hale hadn't slept. The forensics team had worked through the night, cataloging every scrap of material from the sealed corridor. Sarah stood among them, sipping bitter station coffee, her mind unraveling threads she had chased for nearly 3 decades. The bag had been taken to the lab. Soil samples scraped from its seams suggested it had been underground before being moved. That troubled her. One of the technicians approached. "Detective, you'll want to see this." Sarah followed into the corridor. Beneath a loose tile near where the bag had been found, the team had uncovered a fragment of paper, stiff with damp and time. It was a torn envelope. The ink had blurred, but the embossed crest was unmistakable. The Barrett family seal. Sarah's pulse quickened. The Barretts had always denied knowledge of anything connected to the disappearance. Yet here, hidden behind brick and tile, was proof that the family had been inside this corridor. Or at least, someone had wanted their name buried with whatever else lay here. She took photographs, bagged the evidence, and stepped back into the concourse. Reporters crowded beyond the barricades, shouting questions. Sarah ignored them, her gaze fixed on the wall where bricks had been broken loose. She could almost hear echoes, children's laughter fading into silence, the hollow click of footsteps on tile, a train announcement for a platform that never existed. The past was speaking. Finally. The Barrett family slept little that night. Margaret sat by her bedroom window, staring out across the estate gardens, once manicured, now overgrown. The moonlight revealed wild ivy crawling over stone statues, fountains clogged with algae. Her daughter's room, Sophie and Sam's, had been preserved all these years. Posters still hung crookedly. Clothes remained folded in drawers. Margaret kept the door closed most days, but tonight she opened it. The air was stale, carrying the faint sweetness of old fabric. She sat on Sophie's bed, clutching a faded cardigan, and let herself imagine her daughters laughing again. She had always believed they were taken because of who they were. Not just children in the wrong place, but Barrett children. Someone had wanted to hurt the family. But who? By dawn, Sarah drove to Rosebridge Manor. The long gravel drive crunched beneath her tires. The estate loomed against a pale sky, its windows like watchful eyes. Agatha Barrett received her in the library. Sunlight cut through tall windows, illuminating shelves of leather-bound books that smelled of dust and old varnish. "You've come to gloat," Agatha said. Sarah shook her head. I've come because evidence was found that links your family directly to the disappearance. Agatha's mouth tightened. Rubbish. Sarah laid the evidence bag on the table. Inside was the torn envelope fragment. The Barrett crest, faint but undeniable. Agatha didn't flinch, but her fingers gripped her cane harder. It proves nothing. Barrett correspondence is everywhere in this town. Not sealed behind a wall no one was supposed to access, Sarah countered. Agatha's gaze sharpened. What are you suggesting? That someone in your family was involved. Whether directly or through negligence, I don't know yet. But the disappearance of those 6 children wasn't random. For a long moment, Agatha said nothing. The grandfather clock ticked, each second loud as a hammer. Finally, she leaned back. Detective Hale, bloodlines are complicated. You think of them as heritage. We think of them as chains. You tug at one, you find another. Tug hard enough and the whole house falls down. Sarah's jaw tightened. Then maybe it's time the house fell. As she left the manor, Sarah caught sight of Eli watching from the top of the stairs, his face unreadable. Behind him, Margaret lingered in the hallway, her eyes pleading for something. Answers, justice, perhaps even forgiveness. The Barrett house was cracking. Sarah could feel it. And with cracks, the dark things buried inside began to seep out. The storm broke 3 days later. It wasn't weather that lashed the town, but revelation. Each new fragment of evidence pulled from the corridor at Harrow Creek Station deepened the wound the Barrett family had tried to stitch shut. Detective Sarah Hale stood inside the temporary forensic tent erected along Platform 4. The air smelled of bleach, latex, and old water stains. The technicians moved with hushed precision, their gloves snapping, their masks muffling conversation. "Detective," one of them said, beckoning. On a stainless tray lay a bundle of deteriorated cloth. Careful unfolding revealed a child's sweater. Yellow, once bright, now brittle with mildew. Sarah recognized it. She had seen it in a photograph from 1996, a birthday party snapshot where Luke Barrett, the youngest of the cousins, grinned through missing teeth while wearing that very sweater. Her chest tightened. Another relic. Another proof that the children had been here. "What's this stain?" she asked. The technician swabbed it. "Chemical analysis will confirm, but it fluoresces under light." "Likely blood." Sarah forced herself to steady her voice. "Collect, label, send to the lab immediately." As she dictated into her recorder, she noticed something else, a folded scrap in the sweater's pocket. With tweezers, she lifted it free. It was a fragment of stationery, damp and torn, but still legible in parts. She read the faint words aloud. "Not supposed to be here. Keep them until..." The rest dissolved in water stains. Sarah's pulse quickened. A note, a written instruction. She sealed it in an evidence bag, but her mind had already leapt ahead. Keep them. Someone had ordered the cousins held, not killed, not discarded. Held. That evening, Rosebridge Manor erupted. Eli Barrett had called a family meeting, insisting on confronting what had surfaced. The drawing room once again filled with strained voices, the heavy curtains drawn against prying eyes. Sarah was not present. This was Barrett business. But word would reach her, through whispers, through the cracks that now widened. Margaret slammed the sweater onto the table. "Luke's, that's Luke's. You can't tell me this means nothing." Richard poured himself another drink. "It means some lunatic stashed our children's clothes behind a wall to torment us. It means the police have stirred the town into hysteria. Nothing more." "Nothing more?" Margaret's voice was raw. "My children, your nieces, your nephew, never came home. Their things are surfacing in the very place they vanished, and you sit there sipping whiskey as if it's theater?" "Because," Richard shot back, "the alternative is to accept that someone we know had a hand in it. Perhaps someone sitting in this very room." The silence was sharp. All eyes shifted. Toward Margaret, toward Eli, even toward Helen, who shrank back. "Stop it," Margaret whispered. "Stop tearing each other apart." But Eli's voice cut in, low and steady. "He's not wrong. The note they found, it wasn't random. It was written on Barrett's stationery, ours, and it said, 'Keep them.' That means this family isn't innocent." Helen gasped. "You don't know that." Eli turned to their mother. "Unless you'd like to tell us something, Mother?" Agatha Barrett sat rigid in her chair, her cane resting across her lap. Her eyes glimmered like chips of ice. "I told you before, bloodlines are chains, and some chains strangle." "What does that mean?" Margaret demanded. "It means," Agatha said coldly, "that every family has its debts. Some are paid in silence, some in blood." Richard slammed his glass down. "You speak in riddles while we're drowning in ghosts. If you know something, tell us." Agatha's lips curled faintly. "What I know would burn this house to the ground." No one spoke after that. The weight of her words pressed on them all, a suffocating blanket of dread. Detective Sarah Hale didn't need to be inside the Barrett drawing room to feel the tremors. She felt them the next morning when she received a phone call from the district archives. "We found something unusual," the archivist said cautiously. "Buried in property transfer ledgers from the 1940s. The Barrett estate acquired several parcels of land around Harrow Creek, under sealed conditions, not just land. Old railway service tunnels." Sarah frowned. "Railway tunnels?" "Yes, decommissioned lines, storage corridors. The records are vague, but they were tied to wartime contracts. Odd thing is, some of those deeds were signed over with stipulations. One of them mentioned use of the Harrow Creek lower levels." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. Lower levels. The missing cousins had vanished into a corridor that should not have existed. What if the Barrett family had retained private rights to spaces beneath the station, spaces the public never knew? "Send me everything," she said. As she hung up, her thoughts raced. If the Barretts owned secret tunnels, then the disappearances weren't about chance. They were about access. That night, Sarah returned to the sealed corridor with 2 officers. Work lights cast harsh beams across damp tile. The place smelled of rust and old stone. "Here," one officer said, pointing. A section of the floor bore faint seams, a rectangular outline in the tiles. They pried it open. The hatch groaned, then gave way to darkness. A draft rose, damp and cold. Beneath was a staircase, narrow and steep, vanishing into shadow. Sarah's heart pounded. She aimed her flashlight downward. The beam fell on concrete walls, water stains, the suggestion of an old iron rail embedded in the floor. A tunnel. She descended carefully, her footsteps echoing. The air grew colder, heavier. Cobwebs clung to corners. She imagined children's voices bouncing here decades earlier, frightened, echoing against stone. At the bottom, the passage stretched ahead, vanishing into dark. Rusted maintenance carts sat abandoned. Pipes dripped steadily. And on the wall, chalk markings faded but still visible. Names, 6 of them: Clara, Daniel, Sophie, Sam, Emily, Luke. Her breath caught. Beneath the names was a single word scrawled in larger letters. "Wait." Her flashlight trembled in her grip. Back at Rosebridge, Margaret jolted awake in her daughter's room. She had fallen asleep clutching Sophie's cardigan. The air felt heavy, charged. She thought of the chalked names, though she had not yet been told. She thought of the word WAIT. Her mind flickered back to the summer before the children vanished. The family had gathered for Agatha's birthday. The cousins had run wild through the manor gardens, their laughter drifting across clipped hedges. And Margaret remembered something she had never spoken aloud. That week, she had overheard her brother Richard arguing with their mother in the library. His voice furious. "You can't keep them tied to this house forever." And Agatha's reply, "They carry our name." That is enough. Margaret shivered. At the time, she had thought it about inheritance, about expectations. But now, Now she wondered, was that night the seed of what happened? And if so, had the children paid the price of their bloodline's debts? At dawn, Sarah stood outside the tunnel entrance, the chalk names burned into her vision. The case file was no longer about disappearance alone. It was about captivity. And if the Barrett family had sealed away their children, then the question was no longer who took them. It was why. Detective Sarah Hale had learned early in her career that the living were often harder to interrogate than the dead. The dead could not resist, could not deflect, could not bury truth beneath polished smiles. But families, especially wealthy families, had perfected the art of silence. The Barretts were no exception. Sarah stood in the local archives the morning after her discovery of the tunnel. The archivist, a thin woman with horn-rimmed glasses, had laid out files across the table. The pages smelled of mildew and ink, their edges crisp with age. These, the archivist explained, detail land purchases from the 1940s onward. Much of it concerns the railway company, but note the signatures. Always Barrett's. They bought up disused lines, service shafts, even parcels of land beneath the station. Sarah scanned the pages. A repeated clause jumped out. Ownership of subterranean access shall remain sealed and private, for family use only. Her stomach turned. Family use only. Who oversaw these contracts? Sarah asked. The archivist tapped the name at the bottom of a ledger. Samuel Barrett, Agatha's late husband. Sarah scribbled notes, her pen shaking slightly. If the Barrett family had controlled access beneath Harrow Creek Station, then the corridor where the cousins vanished wasn't some random passage. It was Barrett property, a private place to hide. By mid-afternoon, Sarah drove back to Rosebridge Manor. The spring sun caught on the estate's windows, casting them in a blinding glare. The gravel crunch under her tires sounded like bones breaking. Margaret met her at the door. Her face was pale, her hair pulled into a loose braid streaked with silver. She looked like someone half submerged in grief, but still reaching for air. "Detective," she whispered. "You found something, didn't you?" Sarah hesitated. The rules said she should withhold until confirmed, but Margaret's eyes begged for truth. And Sarah knew the woman had lived too long in silence. "We found a tunnel beneath the station," Sarah said softly. "Your children's names were written there, all 6. Margaret's knees buckled. Sarah caught her elbow, guiding her inside. They sat in the front parlor, where heavy curtains filtered the light into dim bars. "Names?" Margaret whispered, her voice trembling. "Written by who?" "We don't know, but they were chalked on the wall like a message. Beneath them was a single word. Wait." Margaret's breath caught. Her eyes filled with tears she fought to hold back. That's what Sophie always told her sister when she was impatient. "Wait for me, Sam. Just wait." Her hands trembled against her lap. Do you think they were alive down there? After the station closed it off?" Sarah swallowed hard. "I think they were taken into those tunnels. Whether they survived past that day, I can't yet say." Margaret pressed her palms to her face. "For years I dreamed of them calling. I thought it was madness. But what if—" She broke off, unable to finish. Sarah leaned forward. "Mrs. Barrett, I need to know about your family's history with the station. Records show your father owned those tunnels. Did you know?" Margaret's hands dropped. Her eyes widened. "Owned them? Number I knew there were stories. My father always said Rosebridge stood on rail money. But no one spoke of tunnels. Mother wouldn't allow talk of such things." Sarah studied her carefully. "Your mother is very deliberate in what she allows." Margaret nodded faintly. "You think she knows. I think she knows more than she's admitted." That evening, Sarah returned to the precinct, her mind heavy with Margaret's haunted face. On her desk lay the lab results from the sweater. Blood. Male. Juvenile. DNA unmatchable to any living database. but the size and type suggested Luke. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. The boy's sweater, blood-stained, left in a tunnel owned by his own family. The Barretts gathered again at Rosebridge that night. News of the tunnel had spread. The press had caught wind, though the chalk names were withheld. The family sat around the dining table, where silverware gleamed untouched. Agatha presided at the head. Her frail body seemed smaller now, but her presence still filled the room like a shadow. Eli spoke first, slamming the newspaper onto the table. "They're saying we hid tunnels, that we knew all along." "Did we?" Richard drawled, sipping wine. Margaret flinched. "Don't." Richard shrugged. "It's a valid question. We grew up hearing whispers of service shafts and war contracts. Perhaps the truth was buried deeper than we realized." "Father never mentioned tunnels," Eli muttered. "Father mentioned many things," Richard said dryly, "most of which we ignored." Helen cleared her throat softly. "I remember once, when I was very little, sneaking into Father's study. There was a map, lines under the station, marked with symbols. I thought it was a game. Mother caught me looking and burned it." All eyes turned to Agatha. Her pale gaze swept across them. "Children don't understand what they see." Margaret's voice cracked. "Did you know? Did you know they were taken down there?" Agatha's lips pressed thin. "What good would it do you if I did?" Margaret rose, trembling. "Because they were my children. Because they were your grandchildren." "Blood is blood," Agatha said coolly. "It flows, it stains, it drowns, but it binds." Eli's hand slammed against the table. "Enough of your riddles. Did you sanction this? Did you order them held?" Agatha leaned on her cane, slowly rising. Her voice, though soft, cut through the air like a blade. "This family was built on survival, on contracts made in shadows. You think your wealth came from honest rails? You think Samuel Barrett built Rosebridge with clean hands? He struck bargains with men who demanded collateral. Sometimes money, sometimes more." The room froze. "Collateral?" Margaret whispered, horrified. Agatha's eyes gleamed coldly. "The Barrett line survives because it pays its debts. Your children were not the first sacrifice this family has made." Sarah learned of the dinner the next day, not from the Barretts themselves, but from a staff maid who called the station anonymously. "They were shouting," the girl whispered over the line. "Madame Agatha spoke of debts, of sacrifices. She said the children weren't the first." Sarah's stomach lurched. "Did she say who took them?" "No, but she said we paid the price. And then she told everyone to leave the table." Sarah gripped the receiver hard. Every instinct screamed this was bigger than a missing persons case. This was legacy, a chain stretching back generations. And if Agatha Barrett had sanctioned sacrifices before, then the cousin's disappearance wasn't just tragedy. It was inheritance. That night, Sarah returned to the tunnel, alone this time. Her flashlight beam caught the chalk names again. The word, wait. She traced the letters with her gloved hand, imagining small hands scratching them in fear. She whispered into the dark, "I'll find you. I'll find what they did." Somewhere in the silence, a drop of water echoed like a ticking clock, and Sarah knew time was almost up. The Barrett House of Secrets was beginning to crack wide open. The tunnel pressed on Sarah's mind long after she had left it. Its damp smell clung to her clothes. The chalked names etched themselves behind her eyelids, and the word wait pulsed like a living thing in her thoughts. By morning, she was back with a forensic team. This time, they brought ground-penetrating radar, lights strung along the walls, and evidence markers every few feet. Sarah descended the narrow staircase again, the beam of her flashlight sweeping across the graffiti. The air was still heavy, tasting of iron. "Detective," one of the technicians called. "We've found something." They crouched near the far wall of the tunnel. The concrete was rougher here, patched in places. Beneath a crumbling seam, the radar pinged hollow space. Sarah's pulse quickened. Open it. They chipped carefully at the plaster, pulling it away piece by piece. Dust billowed, and then a cavity, a crawl space no taller than a child. Inside, the flashlight beam caught fragments, shoes, crumpled paper, the corner of a rusted lunchbox. Sarah's breath caught. She crouched, reaching in with gloved hands. The lunchbox came free, dented but intact. Painted across its lid were faded cartoon animals. She recognized it from the Barrett family photos. It had belonged to Daniel. Inside, wrapped in a brittle napkin, were crumbs turned to dust, a sandwich long decayed. The technician muttered, "They were kept down here." Sarah stared at the cramped hollow, her stomach twisting. It was too small for 6 children, too dark, too airless. It was not a place to play. It was a place to hold. At Rosebridge Manor, the siblings gathered once again, summoned by Eli this time. Margaret sat rigid, her eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. Richard paced near the window, chain-smoking despite the house rules. Helen lingered near the hearth, wringing her hands. Eli spoke first, his voice sharp. "The detectives found more in the tunnels. Our children's belongings, hidden spaces. There's no denying it now." Margaret flinched. "Stop saying our. They were mine. Sophie and Sam were mine. They were all of ours," Eli shot back. "This family lost 6 children that day, and now we must face why." Richard sneered. "Why? Because our mother made deals with devils long before we were born. Because the Barrett fortune was stitched together with blood and shadows. The question isn't why, it's how many times before." Helen gasped softly. "Don't." Richard wheeled on her. "Don't what? Pretend?" She admitted it herself. "Sacrifices, debts. Do you think our wealth was luck?" Margaret pressed her fists to her temples. "Enough, please." Eli's gaze hardened. "This is not about fortune. It's about inheritance. We are bound to her legacy whether we want it or not, and now the police are dragging it into daylight." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Inheritance. Always your favorite word, brother. You've been waiting for Mother's death to finally take Rosebridge. Perhaps you'd sacrifice anyone to keep it." Eli's face flushed. "How dare you!" Margaret rose suddenly, her chair scraping. "Stop it! My girls are gone. Emily is gone. Luke is gone. Daniel is gone. Clara is gone. And you squabble over property like vultures." Silence dropped. Then, from the doorway, Agatha's voice. "Vultures are survivors." They turned. The matriarch stood framed in the dark hall, leaning on her cane. Her presence was smaller, but her shadow seemed to stretch long. "You speak of inheritance," she said softly. "But inheritance is more than land. It is debt. It is stain. You carry what I carried, whether you like it or not." Her gaze swept them. "You think I chose lightly? That I threw children into darkness for sport? Number, I protected this family the only way I could. The rail contracts demanded proof of loyalty. Samuel gave them workers. I gave them heirs." Margaret staggered. What are you saying?" Agatha's eyes flickered coldly. "I gave them what they asked, and in return, the Barrett line endured." Richard whispered, horrified. "You bartered your own blood." Agatha's cane struck the floor. Blood buys survival. That night, Sarah sat in her office, reviewing photographs of the crawl space. She enlarged the images, studying the chalk scrawls. One detail she hadn't noticed in the dim light now leapt out. A crude drawing etched near the names. A house, with peaked roofs and tall windows. Rosebridge Manor. The children had drawn their home while trapped beneath the earth. Sarah's throat tightened. They had still believed they might return. The Barrett siblings did not sleep. Margaret wandered the halls of Rosebridge, her bare feet silent on the stone floors. She stopped before a locked door at the end of the west wing. Few entered here. It had been sealed for decades, ever since their father's study was shuttered after his death. Her hand trembled on the knob. She fetched an old key from her jewelry box, one she had kept hidden since girlhood. The door creaked open. Dust hung thick in the stale air. The study smelled of tobacco and old leather. Papers lay stacked on the desk, yellowed. She lit a lamp and scanned the shelves. Ledgers, maps, contracts, and there, rolled and tied with string, a large parchment. Margaret untied it. It was the map Helen had spoken of. Lines beneath Harrow Creek Station marked with symbols, and across the top, in her father's hand, one word, collateral. Her knees weakened. Her father had known. Her mother had known. Her children had paid. Back at the station, Sarah received a midnight call. The technician's voice was tight. Detective, the crawlspace yielded skeletal fragments, small, juvenile. Sarah's heart clenched. How many? Too soon to say. At least 2. Possibly more. She closed her eyes. The case was no longer disappearance. It was homicide. But worse, it was sacrifice. And the Barrett bloodline was bleeding ghosts into the present. Margaret barely remembered carrying the rolled map out of her father's study. Her hands trembled the whole way down the corridor, and she moved as if in a dream. The house felt alive around her, its beams creaking, its shadows stretching, as though the walls themselves had overheard the truth. When she reached her bedroom, she spread the parchment across the quilt. The map's ink had faded, but the lines were still clear. A lattice of tunnels, shafts, and service corridors snaking beneath Harrow Creek Station. Each junction bore a symbol. Some were marked with simple crosses, others with dark circles smudged heavy by pen. And across the top, in her father's sharp hand, collateral. Margaret's stomach churned. She thought of Sophie's laughter echoing through the garden, of Sam's impatient tapping on her arm, of their vanished footsteps. Collateral. She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth to stifle a sob. The next morning, Detective Sarah Hale was summoned to Rosebridge. Margaret waited in the East Conservatory, sunlight spilling over her like judgment. The map lay on the table between them. Sarah leaned over it, eyes sharp. "Where did you find this?" "In my father's study," Margaret whispered. "Hidden. Helen remembered it. I thought it was gone, but it was waiting." Sarah traced the inked lines. "These symbols, do you know what they mean?" Margaret shook her head. But the word, collateral." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Collateral means payment. Bargain. They treated your children as leverage." Margaret flinched. "Don't." "I have to," Sarah said quietly. "This proves knowledge. Your family owned the tunnels and marked them for use. If this comes to light, it won't just be scandal. It will be criminal culpability." Margaret's voice broke. "Do you think I don't know? But what am I supposed to do, Detective? Tear my family down brick by brick? Expose my own mother?" Sarah met her eyes. "If that's the truth, yes." Tears streaked Margaret's cheeks. "And what if I lose everything? What if Rosebridge falls? What if we lose what little remains of them?" Sarah's voice softened. "You already lost them. What remains is justice." Meanwhile, in the drawing room, Richard poured himself another drink, his fingers unsteady. Eli paced before the hearth, his anger radiating. Helen sat near the piano, her eyes swollen from tears. "She found something," Eli muttered. "Margaret's hiding it." Richard smirked bitterly. "Good. Let her carry the burden for once. She's always been Mother's darling. Let her drown in it." "Don't speak that way," Helen whispered. Richard barked a laugh. "Still playing the loyal child, Helen? Wake up. Mother fed our bloodline to wolves. We were raised on sacrifice. You think the children were the first? I'd wager she buried secrets in this house long before any of us were born." Eli stopped pacing. His voice dropped. "Then we end it. No more secrets. No more inheritance. We burn it down if we have to. Helen gasped. Burn it! Eli, you can't. I can, he snapped. And I will. This family doesn't deserve to survive if it feeds on its own. That evening, Sarah sat in the precinct, examining the map again. She had taken photographs, logged them into evidence, but the physical parchment remained with Margaret, for now. Her eyes lingered on one of the dark circles drawn at the tunnel's edge. She overlaid the image with a current map of Harrow Creek. The circle aligned with an abandoned warehouse, once used by the railway. Her pulse quickened. She called for a warrant. At Rosebridge, night pressed close against the windows. Margaret sat alone in her room, the map rolled tightly in her hands. She could hear faint voices downstairs. Richard's bitter drawl, Eli's sharp retorts, Helen's pleading tones. Then, a sharper sound. A door slamming, footsteps storming across marble. She rose, clutching the map. She feared what the house was becoming, a cage of suspicion, each sibling circling the other like predators. When she opened her door, Eli stood at the end of the hall, his face pale with fury. What are you hiding, Margaret? Her grip tightened. Nothing. His voice was low, dangerous. Liar. For a moment, Margaret thought he might strike her, but he only turned sharply, his footsteps receding down the stairs. She closed her door again, trembling, and she realized the family was splintering. The inheritance wasn't just land or money anymore. It was truth, and whoever controlled it would control the Barrett name. 2 days later, Sarah led a team into the abandoned warehouse. The building sagged with age, its roof beams blackened with mildew. Rats skittered across the concrete floor. At the far end, half hidden beneath crates, they found another hatch. It led down into a tunnel. The air was rank, thick with rot. Their flashlights pierced the dark, revealing more chalk scrawls, older this time, smeared by water and time, and then bones, stacked in a recess, tangled with scraps of fabric. Small bones. At least 3 sets. Sarah's chest constricted. They had been moved, relocated from the crawl space perhaps, or left here as dice cards. But one fragment caught her eye. A shoe buckle, tarnished but recognizable. She had seen it in the Barrett family photographs, clasped at Clara's ankle. Her hand trembled as she bagged it. There would be no denial now. At Rosebridge, news of the discovery struck like a hammer. Margaret collapsed when Sarah told her. Helen wept silently, rocking herself in the parlor. Richard poured another drink with shaking hands. Eli stared at the wall, his jaw tight. Agatha, however, merely sat straighter in her chair. They wanted proof, she said calmly. And proof was given. Margaret's voice was raw. You knew. You always knew. Agatha's eyes glinted. I carried it so you would not. I bore the burden. Now it is yours. Eli's fist slammed the wall. You murdered them. Agatha's lips curved faintly. Survival is never murder. It is necessity. Richard's voice cracked with bitter laughter. Hear that, siblings? Our inheritance is blood. That night, Margaret locked herself in her room again. She spread the map across her desk, staring at the inked word, collateral. Her tears blurred the lines until the tunnels looked like veins. She whispered into the dark, I won't let you take them again. The map seemed to whisper back, rustling in the night air, promising more secrets yet to surface. Detective Sarah Hale had always believed the hardest part of a case was finding the trail. But now, with bones pulled from the tunnels, with the Barrett name scrawled across decades of secrets, she realized the hardest part was holding the trail steady. Every step deeper revealed another fracture, another truth sharp enough to cut her hands. The morning after the warehouse discovery, she sat with a forensic pathologist. The man laid skeletal fragments on sterile cloth, his voice clinical, but his eyes weary. 3 individuals, he confirmed. All juvenile, between 8 and 12 years old, based on size, likely 2 female, 1 male. Sarah's stomach tightened. 6 cousins had vanished. 3 skeletons had surfaced. And the others? She asked. He shook his head. Nothing yet. Either decomposed elsewhere or still hidden. The words hung heavy. Still hidden. At Rosebridge, the family met again in the drawing room. Margaret's face was pale, streaked from weeping. Helen clutched a handkerchief so tightly her knuckles shone white. Richard sat sprawled in his chair, eyes bloodshot. Eli stood stiff near the fireplace, jaw clenched. And Agatha presided, as always, cane across her lap. Sarah entered with measured steps. She carried a folder of photographs. The bones, the map, the crawl space. She laid them on the table. "The evidence is clear," she said firmly. "Your children were taken into tunnels owned by this family. We have proof they were kept there, and we have proof that at least 3 of them died there." Margaret shuddered. Helen buried her face in her hands. Richard muttered a curse under his breath. Eli's voice cut sharp. "So who? Which one of us was complicit?" Sarah held his gaze. "That's what I intend to find out, and I will, even if it means dragging each of you through trial." Agatha's lips curved faintly. "Trials are for the weak. Blood answers to blood." Sarah turned to her. "Not anymore. You said sacrifices were made. Who carried them out? Who took the children into those tunnels?" Agatha's eyes gleamed. "Ask your map." After the meeting, Margaret found Sarah alone in the corridor. She pressed something into the detective's hand, a small brass key, tarnished with age. "It was hidden in Father's study," Margaret whispered. "It matches the locks in the West Wing. I never knew what it opened." "Perhaps you should." Her eyes were wide, almost frantic. "If there are more secrets, I can't be the one to uncover them. Please." Sarah nodded, slipping the key into her pocket. That night, under cover of storm clouds rolling across the estate, Sarah returned to Rosebridge with a warrant and 2 officers. Margaret guided them silently through the West Wing. The key fit a narrow door at the end of the hall. Inside lay a steep stairwell descending into stone. The air was thick, smelling of mildew and something older. At the bottom, they found a small chamber, more cellar than room. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with ledgers, boxes, brittle paper. Sarah opened one ledger and froze. Names, dates. Each line listed a child's name, age, and a symbol beside it, circle, cross, or dash. And there, near the end of the list, Clara, Daniel, Sophie, Sam, Emily, Luke, circles beside each. Collateral. Sarah's hand trembled as she flipped back. Other names appeared, decades older, children she did not recognize, dozens of them. Her stomach lurched. This wasn't a one-time act. It was generational. A ledger of sacrifice, maintained in ink and silence. "Detective?" one of the officers whispered, horrified. Sarah swallowed. "Bag everything, this is our smoking gun." Back upstairs, Margaret leaned against the wall, pale. "What did you find?" Sarah hesitated. "Records, too many." Margaret's breath hitched. "Not just mine?" Sarah shook her head. Margaret closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Then we were never a family. We were a chain, and our children were just links to break." The next morning, police descended on Rosebridge. Uniforms combed the West Wing. Boxes of ledgers were carried out past grim-faced siblings. Reporters swarmed the gates. Agatha Barrett sat in her chair, unflinching. "You think paper damns me?" she scoffed as detectives read her rights. "Paper burns. Blood endures." Sarah leaned close. "Blood also convicts." For the first time, Agatha's eyes faltered. Only for a moment, a crack in the mask. But Sarah saw it. The siblings fractured openly after the arrest. Richard stormed through the house, rage spilling. "She damned us all! She damned the Barrett name to hell!" Eli snapped back. "Good! Let it burn. Let the name rot. Maybe then the world will stop fearing us. Helen sobbed quietly, whispering, "We're cursed." Margaret stood apart, clutching Sophie's cardigan. Her voice was hollow. "No curse, just choices, and we never stop them." Eli turned to her sharply. "And now the choice is ours. Do we fight for Rosebridge or let it collapse?" Margaret met his gaze, her eyes rimmed red. "Collapse. Let it all collapse. It's the only way my girls rest." That night, Sarah sat in her office, reviewing the ledgers. The names stretched back almost a century. She whispered them aloud, one by one, promising herself she would not let them vanish again. But one line chilled her. A note scribbled beside the 6 cousins' names. Delivered, 1996. Await instructions. Sarah stared at it. Delivered. The implication was clear. The Barrett children had not been taken for punishment. They had been handed over. To whom? And why had instructions never come? Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside Rosebridge, walls groaned as though remembering. And Detective Sarah Hale knew the case had only cracked its shell. What lay inside was larger, darker, and far from finished. The word delivered sat in Sarah's mind like a thorn she couldn't dislodge. The ledgers listed every cousin with neat handwriting and cruel precision, and beside each was the same note. Delivered. 1996. Await instructions. It wasn't just a record. It was a receipt. Sarah paced her office long into the night, rain lashing against the window. She imagined the children huddled in the crawl space, chalk in hand, writing their names because someone had already written them in a ledger above ground. She pulled the archives again. Samuel Barrett's contracts weren't limited to railways. In the late 1940s, a shadow company appeared repeatedly in the documents. Carnes Consolidated Holdings. Their stamp marked the purchase of tunnels, warehouses, and unused service shafts. The name prickled at her memory. She dug deeper, scrolling through cold case files until she found it. A criminal alias. Charles Carnes, known smuggler and trafficker, long suspected of child exploitation rings operating along railway lines. Her stomach turned. The Barretts hadn't acted alone. They had been feeding something larger. At Rosebridge, the family gathered without their matriarch. Agatha was being held under guard in a hospital ward, too frail for prison, but the house still felt her presence, her shadow soaking the corners. Margaret sat silent, the map clutched in her lap. Helen trembled beside her, whispering prayers under her breath. Richard prowled the length of the dining room, chain-smoking furiously. Eli stood near the windows, arms folded, staring at the storm outside. Sarah arrived with a folder of documents. She laid them flat on the table. "Carnes," she said simply. "That's who your family dealt with. That's who your children were delivered to." Helen covered her mouth. Richard let out a bitter laugh. Eli swore under his breath. Margaret whispered, "Delivered? You mean they were handed over? Like packages?" Sarah's eyes were hard. "That's what the records suggest. Carnes Consolidated was a front. Charles Carnes ran an operation that exploited children. The Barrett tunnels were a direct pipeline." Helen shook her head violently. No, Mother. She couldn't." Richard cut her off. "Of course she could. This house has always been a marketplace, Helen. Only difference now is we know the currency." Eli's jaw tightened. "So what now? We hand over everything. Destroy the Barrett name forever?" Sarah's voice sharpened. "You don't have a name left to protect. You have a truth to tell, and if you don't, the courts will decide for you." The silence was heavy. Rain beat against the windows. Lightning flashed, throwing stark shadows across their faces. Margaret finally spoke, her voice hollow. "Then let it fall. Rosebridge, the name, all of it. Let it burn if it must. Nothing left of us is worth keeping." Eli's head snapped toward her. "You'd throw away centuries? For what? Guilt?" Margaret's eyes met his. For Sophie, for Sam, for all of them. If their blood bought our legacy, then I want no part of it. Later, Sarah walked the halls of Rosebridge alone. The storm outside made the chandeliers sway and creak. She thought of Carnes, an old criminal ghost. If he had been active in 1996, where was he now? Dead, hiding, or still pulling strings? She descended again to the West Wing cellar where the ledgers had been kept. Her flashlight beam swept across the shelves. In the corner, she noticed a metal box she hadn't cataloged before. Rusted, heavy. She pried it open. Inside lay letters, correspondence on yellowing paper. She scanned the signatures. Each bore the same initials, CK. Her chest tightened. One letter read, 6 confirmed. Delivered per agreement. Awaiting next directive. Payment received. Dated October 1996. Her hand trembled. The Barretts hadn't just lost their children to shadows. They had been paid for them. The next morning, the house was alive with shouts. Eli and Richard clashed in the foyer, their voices echoing off marble. "You knew," Eli roared, jabbing a finger at his brother. "You always knew Father dealt with men like Carnes." Richard sneered, cigarette hanging from his lips. "I suspected. Suspecting is not knowing, and knowing is not stopping. So what does it matter? We're all damned alike." Margaret stood on the stairs, clutching the banister. "You're wrong. It matters who stood by and who fought." Richard laughed harshly. "And what did you do, sister? You cried, you prayed, but you didn't fight. None of us did. Mother ruled and we obeyed." Helen collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "We should have saved them. We should have saved them." Sarah reported the letters to her captain that afternoon. The weight of it pressed her chest as she spoke. "This wasn't just a family crime," she said. "It was a pipeline, a supply line. The Barretts handed children to Carnes, and Carnes fed them into something bigger. If he's still alive, there may be more victims, more families." The captain's jaw set grimly. "Then find him, and bring the Barretts down with him." That night, Margaret dreamt of the tunnels. She saw Sophie and Sam writing their names on the wall, chalk breaking in their tiny fingers. She heard Emily's voice calling from the dark, "Wait for me." She woke with a scream, sweat drenching her sheets, and in the silence that followed, she realized Eli had been right about one thing. Survival had been the Barrett creed. But perhaps destruction was their only redemption. Sarah returned once more to the tunnel. The chalk names were fading under damp, the word "wait" smudged almost to nothing. She crouched and pressed her palm to the stone. "I'm not waiting anymore," she whispered. "I'm coming." Her phone buzzed. A message from the forensics lab. They had matched prints lifted from the lunchbox in the crawl space. Not a child's prints, an adult's. And the name that came back was one she already feared. Charles Carnes. The name Charles Carnes had once been a rumor on dusty case files. Now it was inked in evidence, fingerprints lifted from a child's lunchbox. Sarah stared at the lab report in the sterile light of her office. The world outside was waking. Commuters shuffling, trains running, but her pulse beat only to the syllables of his name. Carnes. The man in the shadows of the Barrett ledgers. The one who had waited for deliveries. He was real. He had touched their lives, and if his fingerprints were on that lunchbox, he had touched their children. The federal database was thin on Carnes. Mugshots from the 1970s. A gaunt man with hollow cheeks, eyes too bright. Arrest records for smuggling, extortion, racketeering. Each case collapsed before trial. Witnesses vanished. Files closed without explanation. By the 1990s, Carnes had disappeared entirely. No death certificate, no confirmed sightings. Just whispers. A recluse in Mexico. A ghost in Eastern Europe. A man who had retired with blood money. But Sarah knew better. Men like Carnes did not retire. They nested. She traced company records, shell corporations branching like a disease. One folded neatly into modern real estate investments. bore his old initials, C.K. Holdings. The registered address was a private ranch outside Austin. Sarah's chest tightened. If Carnes lived, he lived near. Meanwhile, Rosebridge Manor seethed with unrest. Richard sat in the library, pouring brandy into a cracked crystal glass. His eyes were red, his hair unkempt. On the table before him lay a copy of the morning paper. Barrett Dynasty crumbles. Police uncover generational crimes. The article dripped scandal. The Barrett crest was printed beside the words bloodlines and betrayals. Eli strode in, fury in his step. "You spoke to them?" Richard smirked. "Spoke?" Number I shouted. "I ranted, and the vultures scribbled it down." "You sold us out for column inches," Eli snapped. Richard raised his glass. "Correction. I sold you out, not me. I'll paint myself as the dissenter, the son who wanted out but was chained by blood." Margaret entered quietly, clutching the map. "You're tearing us apart." Richard laughed bitterly. "We were torn the day Mother struck her bargains. You're just noticing now." Helen lingered in the doorway, pale and trembling. "Stop fighting, please. Haven't we lost enough?" Richard wheeled on her. "We've lost everything. So let me ask you, sister, do you plan to save the Barrett name or bury it with the rest?" Helen's lips quivered. "I don't know." Eli slammed his fist against the table. "Then I'll decide for us. The name dies, the manor falls, the bloodline ends." Richard sneered. "And when it does, Eli, remember, you'll be nothing but another man screaming into the dark. At least I'll still have my voice in print." That evening, Sarah returned to Rosebridge with a warrant for the study archives. She found Margaret alone in the conservatory, gazing at the storm-soaked gardens. Margaret didn't turn when Sarah entered. "Do you ever feel haunted, Detective?" Sarah paused. "Every day." Margaret's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. "I hear them at night. Sophie's laugh, Sam's tapping, Emily calling from the halls, and now I hear the word delivered in Mother's voice, like a ledger line, like they were never children, just debts." Her eyes glistened. "If Carnes is still alive, if he took them, then maybe he knows where they are. Maybe he can tell me what became of them." Sarah's voice was steady. "That's what I intend to find out." Margaret turned then, her face pale but resolved. "Then promise me, Detective, if you find him, make him speak, for them, for all of them." 2 nights later, Sarah drove down a lonely ranch road outside Austin. Oaks bent over the gravel drive. The gate bore no name, but the records tied it to C.K. Holdings. The house beyond was sprawling, low, lit faintly at the edges. She waited with a surveillance team, night vision humming. Through binoculars, she saw movement. A figure on the porch, older, heavy-set, leaning on a cane. His face was half hidden, but the profile matched. Charles Carnes. He wasn't dead. He was waiting. Back at Rosebridge, paranoia peaked. Richard began locking his door at night. Helen wept at the slightest sound. Eli roamed the halls with a fury, declaring he would burn the ledgers himself if the police didn't. Margaret withdrew, clutching her daughter's photographs. Then, one evening, Richard disappeared. His car was gone from the drive. His room was stripped of clothes and cash. On his desk, a single note. Survival. As always. Eli spat when he read it. Coward. He'll sell his story to whoever pays most. Helen's hands shook violently. He won't come back, will he? Margaret whispered. No. He's chosen his side. At dawn, Sarah received the call. Surveillance had tracked Carnes leaving his ranch in a black sedan. Destination unknown. Sarah's pulse quickened. The game had shifted. The hunter was moving. That night, as storm clouds thickened again, Margaret dreamt once more of the tunnels. She heard the word wait, whispered over and over, until it became unbearable. She woke and went to the West Wing cellar. She spread the ledgers across the stone floor, pages fluttering like restless birds. "Enough," she whispered. "Enough of your waiting." And in that moment, she swore she would not let Carnes decide the Barrett legacy. If blood had written their past, truth would write their end. The ranch sat silent under the weight of the Texas night. Sarah crouched behind the scrub brush, her surveillance van parked 100 yards back. Through night vision, the house glowed pale green, windows pulsing faintly with lamplight. Charles Carnes had been still for hours, an old man pacing a porch, occasionally lighting a cigarette, staring out into the darkness as though waiting for something that never arrived. Sarah's radio hissed softly. "Targets on the move." She adjusted her binoculars. Carnes was descending the porch steps, cane tapping against the gravel. He moved slower than the specter she had built in her mind. His frame stooped, his face sagging with age. But there was something in the way he paused, head tilting toward the dark, that told her he wasn't frail. He was listening, measuring, a predator that had merely grown old, not harmless. The next morning she drove back into Austin and filed for a warrant. Judges balked at chasing ghosts, but the fingerprints, the ledgers, the letters, there was enough to open doors. She knew time was short. If Carnes sensed the walls closing, he would vanish again, as he had for decades. That night, Sarah returned with a small tactical team. The gate creaked as they forced it. They approached the house with muted steps, weapons lowered but ready. The front door was ajar. Inside, the air reeked of stale smoke and mothballs. Furniture sagged beneath dust cloths. The silence was heavy, punctuated by the faint tick of a grandfather clock. Sarah's flashlight beam swept across the living room. Photographs lined the mantel, sepia portraits of railway depots, freight yards, tunnels. But no family pictures, no children. Her chest tightened. This was not a home. It was a lair. She climbed the stairs. On the second floor, she found him. Charles Carnes sat in a leather chair by a window, hands folded over his cane. His hair was gray, his face lined, but his eyes were bright, sharp, predatory. He did not flinch at the sight of the guns. "I wondered when you'd come," he said, voice gravelly but calm. Sarah's grip tightened on her weapon. "Charles Carnes, you're under arrest for crimes against—" He chuckled, low and rasping. "Don't waste breath, detective. I've been arrested more times than you've had birthdays. You'll find nothing here, only memory, and memory fades." Sarah stepped closer. "Your fingerprints were found in Harrow Creek tunnels, on evidence tied to 6 missing children, Barrett children." Carnes' smile spread slowly, grotesquely. "Ah, the Barretts, my most loyal clients. Such a shame they finally turned Judas." Sarah's heart pounded. "What did you do with the children?" For a moment, Carnes only tapped his cane against the floor, steady, rhythmic. Then he leaned forward, his eyes catching the lamplight. "Delivered," he said simply. At Rosebridge, storm clouds gathered again, pressing low and gray against the gables. Eli sat in the drawing room, fists clenched on his knees. Helen hovered by the window, wringing her hands. Margaret paced, Sophie's cardigan draped across her shoulders like armor. Richard was gone. 3 days with no word. "He sold us," Eli growled. "That's what he's done. He's with the press, or worse, he's with Carnes himself." Helen's voice cracked. "Richard would never." "Richard would always," Eli snapped. "Survival, remember? His favorite word. He'd cut us loose if it meant saving his own skin." Margaret's pacing slowed. "Maybe he already has." The siblings fell silent. The house groaned under the weight of storm. Margaret looked at them both, her eyes hardening. "If Richard sides with Carnes, he's not our brother anymore. He's another enemy." Helen gasped softly. "Margaret, don't." But Margaret's voice was steady. "The line has been drawn. Those who protect Carnes and those who destroy him choose." Back at the ranch, Sarah pressed. Delivered to whom? She demanded. Carnes leaned back, eyes glinting. Do you know what makes a family dynasty endure, detective? It is not wealth. It is not land. It is transaction. One thing traded for another, quietly, endlessly, until the world forgets where the rot began. The Barretts understood that. Your courts never will. Sarah forced her voice calm. Where are the children? Carnes tilted his head. You think of them as lost. I think of them as exchanged. Rage surged in her chest. Exchanged for what? His smile thinned. For survival. For the bloodline. For the house they still rot in. Her pulse thundered. She stepped forward, close enough to see the cataracts blooming in his eyes, the tremor of age in his hands. You'll die in prison, she said coldly. Carnes chuckled again. I'll die anywhere. But the Barretts? They'll keep living, and they'll keep feeding. It's what they do. As officers closed in to cuff him, his cane clattered to the floor. Inside the hollow shaft, tucked where his palm had rested, Sarah glimpsed a roll of paper. She snatched it free. Another map. This one marked not Harrow Creek, but Rosebridge. That night, Sarah spread the new map across her desk. Unlike the crude lines of the old tunnel diagram, this was precise, architectural. Beneath Rosebridge sprawled a network of vaults, chambers, and hidden passages. And at the far end, beneath the eastern foundations, a chamber circled in red. Beside it, in Carnes' slanted hand, ledger complete. Sarah's breath caught. If Carnes' map was true, then Rosebridge itself was not just a house of secrets. It was the archive. And whatever the Barretts had buried was still waiting there. At Rosebridge, lightning split the sky. Helen sat in her room, whispering prayers. Eli roamed the halls with restless fury. Margaret stood alone in the East Conservatory, staring into the storm. In her hands, she held the map her father had left. And in her mind, she heard Carnes's voice echoing from some unseen chamber. Exchanged. Exchanged. Somewhere deep beneath her feet, the truth was waiting. And she knew they could not keep waiting much longer. The rain had not stopped. It battered Rosebridge like a siege, seeping into every crack, every rotting window frame. The house seemed smaller now, shrunken under the storm. Its grandeur eroded to a husk of secrets and stone. Detective Sarah Hale stood in the foyer, boots dripping mud, folder clutched beneath her arm. She had not slept since Carnes's arrest. His words echoed in her skull. Exchanged, ledger complete. The Barrett siblings gathered slowly, their faces wan and drawn. Margaret descended the stairs with Sophie's cardigan wrapped around her shoulders. Helen clung to the banister, trembling, lips whispering prayers. Eli stalked in from the study, jaw set, eyes like flint. Richard's absence hung over them all. Sarah spread the new map across the dining table. Candlelight flickered across its inked lines, tunnels etched with meticulous precision, leading deep under Rosebridge itself. At the far end, a chamber circled in red. This, Sarah said, voice steady, is what Carnes left behind. A chamber beneath the east wing. He marked it ledger complete. I believe it's where the final answers lie. Helen whimpered. Number, we can't go down there. Whatever Mother hid, it isn't meant for us. Eli's hand slammed against the table. It's meant for us more than anyone. Our blood built it. Our blood paid for it. We'll see it with our own eyes before it buries us alive. Margaret's gaze never left the circle on the map. If my children's bones are down there, I want to hold them, one last time. Then Rosebridge can fall. They gathered lanterns and descended. The east wing cellar door groaned as Sarah unlocked it. The air that spilled out was damp, rank, tinged with iron. Their footsteps echoed as they moved down the stone stairs, shadows wavering along the walls. The passage opened into an arched corridor, older than the house itself. Masonry rough, mortar crumbling. Rats skittered along cracks. Water dripped steadily, each drop magnified in the silence. Eli led, lantern high. Margaret followed, clutching Sophie's cardigan. Helen trailed behind, weeping softly. Sarah walked last, weapon holstered, map in hand. At each junction, Sarah checked the diagram. Carnes had been precise. Every turn, every stair matched the ink. The corridor sloped deeper, air colder with each step. Finally, they reached a heavy oak door bound in rusted iron. Its hinges groaned as Eli shoved it open. Beyond lay the chamber. Lantern light spread slowly across the space. Stone walls pressed close. In the center, a great table of blackened oak. Upon it, dozens of ledgers stacked high, spines cracked, pages yellow. Along the walls hung iron hooks, each bearing remnants of cloth, small shoes, ribbons, faded scraps of fabric. Margaret choked on a sob. Sophie's ribbon. She reached for a strip of faded pink silk, trembling in her hands. Helen collapsed to her knees, covering her face. Eli's jaw tightened, fury rippling through his frame. Sarah forced her breath steady and approached the table. She opened one ledger at random. Inside, names scrawled in looping hand. Children's names, dates, symbols beside each. Generations catalogued like livestock. At the back of the chamber, something caught her light. A smaller table, lower, ringed by wax drippings. Upon it lay 6 small tin lunchboxes. Sarah's chest constricted. She approached slowly. Each bore a child's name, scratched faintly into the metal. Sophie, Sam, Emily, Luke, Clara, Daniel. Helen wailed, clutching her chest. Margaret touched Sophie's box with shaking fingers. "They were here," she whispered. "All this time, they were here beneath us." Eli's lantern swung across the far wall. There, carved deep into stone, words in a child's uncertain hand. Wait. Dozens of repetitions, scratched over and over until nails bled or chalk broke. Wait, wait, wait! Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tight. They left their last message here. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by Helen's sobs. Eli's voice rang low, shaking. "This is it. This is the truth we feared, our legacy written in ledgers and blood." Margaret lifted Sophie's cardigan to her face, inhaling the ghost of a scent long gone. Her voice was hoarse. "Then let it end here, tonight." A sound cut through the chamber, a footstep above. The siblings froze. Sarah drew her weapon, lantern swinging. Another creak overhead. Slow, deliberate. Eli snarled. "Richard!" Margaret's eyes widened. "He came back." Sarah signaled for silence. They listened. More steps. A door groaning. The faint scrape of wood above the cellar stair. Helen's breath hitched. "He's with them. He's brought them here." Sarah's pulse thundered. She gestured toward the lanterns. "Extinguish them, now!" One by one, the lights went dark, plunging the chamber into black. Only the drip of water and the echo of footsteps remained. The Barretts huddled close, fear thick in their breathing. Sarah kept her weapon raised, ears straining. The house above groaned, alive with intruders or ghosts. And somewhere in the dark, Richard's voice called softly down the stairwell. "Family." The dark was suffocating. The Barretts stood huddled in the chamber, ledgers and lunchboxes crowding around them like ghosts. Sarah's weapon gleamed faintly in the last ember of a lantern wick. Above, footsteps creaked closer. Then the voice again, low, coaxing, almost gentle. "Family, I know you're down there. Don't hide from me." "Richard." Eli's fists curled at his sides. "Coward," he hissed. "He's led them here." Margaret clutched Sophie's cardigan, her lips pressed against the fabric. Helen trembled so hard the sound of her teeth chattered against the stone silence. Sarah raised a hand for quiet. Her pulse hammered in her throat. If Richard wasn't alone, they were trapped. The cellar door groaned. Light spilled faintly down the stairwell. A lantern. A shadow. Richard descended slowly, one step at a time, the glow haloing his gaunt face. He looked thinner, his eyes sunken, his clothes damp from rain. When his gaze found them, he smiled faintly. "I told you survival is all that matters." Eli lunged forward. "Who are you with?" Richard held up both hands, lantern swaying. "No one, I swear it. I came back because I realized survival isn't just running, it's choosing the right side." Sarah's voice was cold. "And which side is that?" Richard's eyes glittered. "The one that knows the truth. The one that holds it, not hides from it. Carnes is gone, but his work, our work, lives in these walls, and someone must decide what survives." He stepped into the chamber, gaze sweeping over the ledgers, the hooks, the scratched word, "Wait." His smile trembled. "We could burn it, all of it, end the curse." Eli barked a laugh. "Or sell it, you mean? That's what you came for? To profit off our blood one last time?" Richard's jaw tightened. "If the world must know, let them pay for it." Margaret's voice broke the standoff, low and steady. No one profits from this. Not anymore." She stepped forward, holding Sophie's lunchbox against her chest. "I want to take them home, and then I want Rosebridge to die." Helen gasped softly. "But the house—" Margaret turned, her eyes wet but fierce. "The house is the tomb. It is their prison. It deserves to fall." Sarah moved between them, her voice sharp. "Enough! This is no longer your decision. This chamber, these ledgers, their evidence. They'll go to the courts. The world will see." Richard sneered. "And when the world sees, they'll crucify us. Our name, our blood. You'll give them exactly what they want. A public execution." Sarah's gaze didn't falter. Maybe that's justice. Eli stepped closer to her, his face shadowed in lantern glow. "And if justice destroys us, what then? Do we deserve to live? Or to burn with the house?" Sarah met his eyes. "That's not my choice. It's yours. The truth is out. What you do with it will write your ending." A thunderclap shook the manor above. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The chamber seemed to exhale, the weight of centuries pressing on their shoulders. Helen suddenly cried out, clutching her chest. "I hear them! The children! They're here with us!" Her eyes darted wildly to the scratched wall. "They've been waiting all along." She staggered forward, palms against the stone. "Forgive us," she sobbed. "Forgive us for leaving you in the dark." Margaret caught her, holding her close, whispering through tears. "We're here now. We'll take you home." Richard's lantern shook in his hand. "Then burn the rest," he whispered. "Bury the shame." Eli wrenched the lantern from him. "Number. Let it stand in the open. Let the world choke on what we were." He hurled the lantern to the ground. Flames spilled across old wax drippings, crawling hungrily toward the ledgers. "Eli!" Sarah shouted, rushing forward. She stamped at the fire, smothering it with her coat before it could devour the evidence. Smoke choked the chamber, acrid and thick. She rounded on him, fury blazing. "You don't get to erase them again. Not with fire, not with silence. They'll be remembered. Every name." The chamber rang with her words, final as a verdict. Margaret sank to her knees, clutching Sophie's ribbon in one hand, the lunchbox in the other. Her tears dripped onto the stone floor. "Then let the house go," she whispered. "As long as their names survive, Rosebridge doesn't need to." Sarah stared at her, then slowly nodded. "The ledgers will go to the court. The truth will live. But the house, that's your decision." Lightning cracked above, shaking the beams. The old manor groaned as though it, too, had heard her words. Hours later, as dawn broke pale and gray, Rosebridge stood silent under the storm's aftermath. Sarah emerged from the East Wing cellar with the ledgers boxed and sealed, officers waiting to carry them into vans. Margaret followed, clutching Sophie's lunchbox. Helen leaned on Eli's arm, eyes vacant, lips still whispering prayers. Richard lingered at the threshold, gaze darting between survival and ruin. The manor seemed to sag, its windows dark hollows, its halls echoing with the voices of children long gone. Margaret turned one last time, tears streaking her face. "You fed on us for generations. Now we feed you to the earth." She reached for the detonator Sarah had placed in her palm, a charge set by demolition crews summoned overnight, with full consent of the authorities. For a moment, she hesitated. Sophie's ribbon tangled around her wrist. Then she pressed the switch. A deep roar thundered through the valley. Rosebridge shuddered, walls cracking, windows bursting outward. With a final groan, the manor collapsed inward, its foundations swallowing it whole. Dust billowed into the dawn, carrying with it the ghosts of ledgers and laughter, of bargains and blood. The Barrett siblings stood together in the ash of their dynasty. Sarah watched them silently, the weight of justice and loss heavy in her chest. Margaret clutched Sophie's lunchbox tighter and whispered, "We found you. We didn't forget." And for the first time in 16 years, the word wait, carved in stone, no longer echoed unanswered. The house was gone. Weeks later, the land where Rosebridge had stood was nothing but leveled stone and ash. The valley looked bare without its jagged silhouette, the trees reclaiming the horizon. Locals came to the ruins sometimes, standing at the police tape, whispering about the collapse. Some spoke of justice, others of curses lifted. A few wondered if the ghosts had finally been set free. To Margaret, it was simply absence, a hole where her life had been. She stood at the edge one morning, autumn wind stirring her hair. In her arms, she carried Sophie's lunchbox, polished now but still faintly scratched with her daughter's name. Inside it, she kept the ribbon, the cardigan button, and a faded photo of the cousins, taken the summer before they vanished. She opened it sometimes to remind herself they had been real, not just names in ledgers. Helen stayed in a care facility nearby. Her nerves had never recovered. She spent her days by a chapel window, murmuring prayers, clutching rosaries until her fingers bled. She rarely spoke to anyone but Margaret, and even then her words circled endlessly back to the same plea: forgiveness, forgiveness. Eli lived alone on the outskirts of town. He refused interviews, refused company, and drank himself silent. Some nights Margaret heard his truck rumbling near the ruins, headlights sweeping the rubble before vanishing again. He had vowed to outlive the shame, but Margaret saw the cracks widening. Richard disappeared completely. No forwarding address, no word. Perhaps Europe, perhaps Mexico, perhaps already dead. Margaret did not waste her grief on him. The courts moved quickly. With Carnes in custody and the ledgers as evidence, prosecutors rebuilt a case once thought impossible. Dozens of families came forward after the story broke, names in the ledgers matching long unsolved disappearances. Some wept in relief to finally know. Others crumbled under the confirmation. The trial became a spectacle. Cameras crowded the courthouse. Headlines screamed about the Barrett bloodline. Margaret avoided it all. She testified once, voice trembling as she held Sophie's lunchbox, describing the ribbons and scratched wall of the underground chamber. Then she left, refusing to watch Carnes smirk at the world from behind bulletproof glass. When the verdict came, guilty on counts of trafficking, conspiracy, multiple homicides, Margaret felt no victory, only quiet. Carnes was sentenced to life without parole. His words haunted her still, exchanged. But she told herself that silence was better than screams. Detective Sarah Hale stood with her on the ruins one afternoon, weeks after the trial. The air smelled of cedar and rain. "You kept your promise," Margaret said softly. "You made him speak." Sarah shook her head. "Not enough. He never told us where, only what. The children's remains may never be found. Margaret's fingers tightened on the lunchbox. Then this is their grave. She gestured to the ground beneath them. This soil, this ash, it will hold them now. Sarah's gaze lingered on the horizon, on the bare stretch where Rosebridge once loomed. You ended it. That matters. Margaret turned to her, eyes red but steady. Did I? Or did I only join the line of Barretts choosing what to bury? Sarah had no answer. Life after the trial was fractured. Some days Margaret woke convinced she still heard Sophie's laughter echoing from the halls. Other days she walked the quiet streets of Austin with Sophie's lunchbox in her arms, as if her daughter had only stepped away and would come running to her again. The world whispered about curses, about bloodlines tainted, about sins passed down. Margaret ignored them. She no longer cared what strangers thought of her name. Her only prayer was that Sophie's spirit and the others finally knew they had been found, that weight carved into stone no longer went unanswered. On a gray morning in late November, Margaret visited Helen at the care home. Her sister sat by the chapel window, rosary in hand, lips moving soundlessly. Margaret placed the lunchbox on her lap. Helen's eyes flickered down, and for the first time in weeks, her mouth curved into the faintest smile. You brought them, she whispered. They're with us, Margaret said gently. Always. Helen touched the ribbon inside the box with trembling fingers. Then maybe they forgive us. Maybe we can go soon. Margaret gripped her hand tightly. Not yet. Not until we've carried their names long enough for the world to remember. That night Margaret dreamed of Rosebridge once more. Not as it had fallen, but as it had been when she was a child. Bright halls, laughter echoing, cousins running barefoot through the corridors. No ledgers, no hooks, no shadows. Only joy. In the dream, Sophie ran to her, blue ribbon in her hair, arms outstretched. Margaret bent to catch her, heart bursting, but before she could touch her, Sophie whispered a single word in her ear. Home. And then the house dissolved, walls falling away, leaving only open fields and sky. Margaret woke with tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, they were not only of grief. In the end, the Barrett name did not survive. The newspapers wrote its obituary with relish. The estate was sold, the land parceled out. What little fortune remained went to restitution funds for families of the lost. But Margaret did not fight it. Let the name die, she thought. Let the bloodline rot in history books. What mattered were the names in the ledgers, no longer hidden, no longer erased. Sophie, Sam, Emily, Luke, Clara, Daniel. She whispered them every night like a prayer, and in the quiet afterward, she imagined them at peace. No longer waiting. Back at the ranch, Sarah pressed. Delivered to whom? She demanded. Carnes leaned back, eyes glinting. Do you know what makes a family dynasty endure, detective? It is not wealth. It is not land. It is transaction. One thing traded for another, quietly, endlessly, until the world forgets where the rot began. The Barretts understood that. Your courts never will. Sarah forced her voice calm. Where are the children? Carnes tilted his head. You think of them as lost. I think of them as exchanged. Rage surged in her chest. Exchanged for what? His smile thinned. For survival. For the bloodline. For the house they still rot in. Her pulse thundered. She stepped forward, close enough to see the cataracts blooming in his eyes, the tremor of age in his hands. You'll die in prison, she said coldly. Carnes chuckled again. I'll die anywhere. But the Barretts? They'll keep living, and they'll keep feeding. It's what they do. As officers closed in to cuff him, his cane clattered to the floor. Inside the hollow shaft, tucked where his palm had rested, Sarah glimpsed a roll of paper. She snatched it free. Another map. This one marked not Harrow Creek, but Rosebridge. That night, Sarah spread the new map across her desk. Unlike the crude lines of the old tunnel diagram, this was precise, architectural. Beneath Rosebridge sprawled a network of vaults, chambers, and hidden passages. And at the far end, beneath the eastern foundations, a chamber circled in red. Beside it, in Karn's slanted hand, ledger complete. Sarah's breath caught. If Karn's map was true, then Rosebridge itself was not just a house of secrets. It was the archive. And whatever the Barretts had buried was still waiting there. At Rosebridge, lightning split the sky. Helen sat in her room, whispering prayers. Eli roamed the halls with restless fury. Margaret stood alone in the East Conservatory, staring into the storm. In her hands, she held the map her father had left. And in her mind, she heard Carnes's voice echoing from some unseen chamber. Exchanged. Exchanged. Somewhere deep beneath her feet, the truth was waiting. And she knew they could not keep waiting much longer. The rain had not stopped. It battered Rosebridge like a siege, seeping into every crack, every rotting window frame. The house seemed smaller now, shrunken under the storm. Its grandeur eroded to a husk of secrets and stone. Detective Sarah Hale stood in the foyer, boots dripping mud, folder clutched beneath her arm. She had not slept since Carnes's arrest. His words echoed in her skull. Exchanged, ledger complete. The Barrett siblings gathered slowly, their faces wan and drawn. Margaret descended the stairs with Sophie's cardigan wrapped around her shoulders. Helen clung to the banister, trembling, lips whispering prayers. Eli stalked in from the study, jaw set, eyes like flint. Richard's absence hung over them all. Sarah spread the new map across the dining table. Candlelight flickered across its inked lines, tunnels etched with meticulous precision, leading deep under Rosebridge itself. At the far end, a chamber circled in red. "This," Sarah said, voice steady, "is what Carnes left behind. A chamber beneath the east wing. He marked it ledger complete. I believe it's where the final answers lie." Helen whimpered. "Number, we can't go down there. Whatever Mother hid, it isn't meant for us." Eli's hand slammed against the table. "It's meant for us more than anyone. Our blood built it. Our blood paid for it. We'll see it with our own eyes before it buries us alive." Margaret's gaze never left the circle on the map. "If my children's bones are down there, I want to hold them, one last time. Then Rosebridge can fall." They gathered lanterns and descended. The east wing cellar door groaned as Sarah unlocked it. The air that spilled out was damp, rank, tinged with iron. Their footsteps echoed as they moved down the stone stairs, shadows wavering along the walls. The passage opened into an arched corridor, older than the house itself. Masonry rough, mortar crumbling. Rats skittered along cracks. Water dripped steadily, each drop magnified in the silence. Eli led, lantern high. Margaret followed, clutching Sophie's cardigan. Helen trailed behind, weeping softly. Sarah walked last, weapon holstered, map in hand. At each junction, Sarah checked the diagram. Carnes had been precise. Every turn, every stair matched the ink. The corridor sloped deeper, air colder with each step. Finally, they reached a heavy oak door bound in rusted iron. Its hinges groaned as Eli shoved it open. Beyond lay the chamber,